feedback? What I'd like to do is have you give personal feedback, and then I'd like to spend some time in, you know, what was I doing feedback. So.
I think this was said in some ways, but what I was observing you saying in a few different ways was that you're living in other people's world, that this is not your world wherever you are. I noticed you were saying that when you were talking with Seymour, and I got the feeling of that being in the bar, being in a lot of places. It's my impression that that's kind of like an overlay, that you're living in someone else's world, that somehow you are a foreigner in someone else's world. Just wondering if that is all the time, or if there's any place where this is your world, like when you're in your van. Are you in your world?
No, that's my world.
So
I'm a foreigner in gay bars, and foreigner in gay ghettos, and foreigner in straight bars. I'm foreigner mostly when I'm with people. When I'm alone, I live in some insane fantasy world.
Mm-hmm. And there are some places where it is your world, like in your van when you're.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. No, I think when I'm in my van, it's like being in a hospital. Like being, yeah, it's like being in a mental place, because I'm just living in this insane dream world that's in there, and I'm manufacturing stuff and having my space, and it's not real there, it's just.
Mm-hmm.
My sense was that you feel invasive, you are afraid to, instead of just stepping into somebody else's world, which could be yours as well, you feel like you're invading somebody else's space. That was the sense I got, that you were afraid of invading somebody's space by just simply making contact. Is that? And if I would come into your van, if I would visit you, would you feel I invade your space?
No.
How would you perceive me? How would you invite? I mean, would I be invited, or?
Yeah, you would be invited. And Seymour said something earlier in his speech that really, I wrote some notes about that. Something around 2, when you start relating to your parents and telling them things. Well, when I was 2 and I liked little boys, I mean, I knew then that I played with boys, but I couldn't tell my parents that. I mean, I had nobody to say, this is my experience now. This is my experience now. So I denied that for so many years, for 30, I was probably 30 when I told my parents and friends, and so now if you came to me, and I felt comfortable with you in my van, I think I would be pouring out that stuff, that back stuff about this is who I am and all, and then I'd be testing to see, whether you reject me or if it's okay, or if I ever see you again to visit me in my van, because I tell you, at this age, well, this is my reality. I repressed that for so long that I still feel like I can't, and maybe I can in a lot of situations, can't go in the River Inn and sit down and tell them I'm gay or I'm bi or whatever my story is. But because of my parents and not having anybody for so many years, I feel totally cut off from any kind of real communication. Mm-hmm. I have to kind of lie or kind of color it, so I don't have to. I mean, I'm changing that, but I still feel invasive if I'm real with you.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm me.
Are you being real right now?
Yeah.
And do you feel invasive right now?
A little bit. I don't feel as invasive with the women and some of the men as I do with some men.
The ones that...
The men that I'm attracted to, then I feel like putting this wall up and not saying my reality. This is who I am. I want to kind of put this other thing on.
Do you get attracted to women too?
Yes.
Does that happen with the women you get attracted
The women that I think I could love, I don't like to talk to about all of this. Because I'm afraid that when I do talk about it, then they're going to reject me. As the straight men friends that I would like to have, that fear of rejection comes up.
I find you're the one who places the barriers between the relationship.
Between you and him?
Between you and I, you place the barriers. And I see you do that with other people. I wish that were fair. But I do see that happen. Come out a little bit, test the waters.
That's what Seymour kind of said. He relates to me. It's something that I can really see I do, and this is the scary part. Is when it gets to be too much love coming at me, like around Christmas time and around my birthday, I go crazy. I mean, that's when I then say, I'm going to jump off the cliff, and I'm psychotic, you got to help me. And I totally could walk through that lodge and not see any of you, male or female, or and I stay in that psychotic state. Until I don't know what I change inside. I guess I cut myself off so much that it's either I'm going to die from it, or stay dead that way, or I'm going to, okay, I get through that, work through that period, and then I come out and, or you touched me on the last time, when I was in one of those states where I just didn't recognize anybody out there in my field, and you just came up and said some nice things to me about, I see you're going through a hard time, which was really good for me because a lot of people just ignore me then because they don't. I scare them because I get too. My sense is that I get too bizarre, or I work at being too bizarre in my psychosis, so that you'll leave me alone, and I do cut it off, one way or the other. I'll push you away. I wish I wouldn't either. That's what I'm working on here, is trying to get to that point where I'll stop that destructive. I mean, I'm killing myself. I really feel very self-destructive, and that's my way of cutting off any love that I get. Or telling myself that you really don't. What's in it for you? Why are you being so nice to me? What do you want? That kind of dialogue constantly, even when we're being really...
Any other feedback? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Excellent films. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, whenever I'm working, it's, at times I've got my strategic hat on, and sometimes I've got my personal hat on. And I think that working this way, you have to do both. But, we're trying for an honest exchange of what's going on, and that, when it's working, doesn't have any strategy. And Lee and I have worked and known each other for some time, so we could probably go a bit deeper and I could be free of my technical hat or my therapist strategist hat. And at times I put it on because it's the teaching class. And at times I pointed out what I was doing with him because it's a teaching class. Essentially what I would try to do, and what I tried to do, was to bring out what is unspoken between us, to say what's in my mind, and also to ask for him to explore what it is that might be tentative to be said. Essentially, I feel like his figure ground that is not working is the figure ground between mind and thought, between mind and environment, between self and environment, the foreigner notion. It's very strong here, and somewhat with good reason that he belongs to a subcultural group that has traditionally kept itself separate from heterosexual groups, and here at Esalen, where in 1986 it's a freer world. But there is this sense that what is missing in the play of figure ground is exchange, an easy exchange, or an exchange between himself and others, an exchange between myself and he, an exchange between you and he. So what my strategy was to try to draw out the fact that I'm here too, that I'm not only, that he's not only himself with his thoughts, his fantasies, his projections, his shoulds, but he's also a part of a larger whole that includes my reality. So I asked him to use his perceptual equipment to start paying attention to me. And I think my first strategic interaction was, in terms of that, was to start saying, well, what should I do to make it easier for you? That he's putting all the responsibility on himself in a way, and part of it is, in any world, we're interdependent, we're not totally independent of one another. And to ask him to begin to recognize some parts of what is an interdependent world, and to ask him to recognize in his perceptual field, to have him start thinking in terms of that, like, what can I do? And when I asked him to do that, it meant new concepts for him. And naturally he has a difficulty, he'll be confused a bit to do that. And that brought me to the question of what it is to be tentative. That when we're sitting outside, and at least I am, I don't know if you are, when I see Lee's tentativeness, he's so delightful, and so all my nerve endings warm up for him. That his tentativeness is so creative and so responsive and kind of a real thing. And that's just what his should system is saying to him. Don't be that. Don't be tentative. Be certain. And that blocks out any possibility of finding out what is fresh and new. And that one of the things in Gestalt work that is connected also to Buddhistic work is that each moment is brand new. And if the person is not confronting the moment that's brand new, there's some filter in the way. There's some distortion going on, or else they would recognize that the new moment, the new here and now, is brand new. And that all of your plans, and all of your past history really don't mean anything with what the here and now is. It's something really new, and contains elements of your past. It contains some of your plans. But when that dominates, just letting the here and now be there to the extent that it does often with Lee, then we lose his responsive vitality, his kind of being here and now. And when I began to encourage and he began to trust that it was okay to be tentative, then what happened? That he started to change before our eyes. The posture of holding himself in the past, or holding himself in protection, his posture, his gestures, all began to change. And he began to be even playful with creative. Wasn't that cute? That we can see that parts of his system are allowed to become innocent, and other parts of his system become that are still held in states of protective defensiveness, this tenseness here, tenseness up here. That a big part of doing Gestalt work is just helping the person wake up to their body so that they can feel, well, what's happening right now? And do I need to hold myself stiff right now when I check out with my eyes and ears the world around me? And gradually, as we build more of a play between figure and ground, between self and environment, that this worked really well with Lee, that as he began to be more in touch with the world around him, as it is right now, then he begins to inhabit the world of the here and now more, what's the word? He's more saturated with the here and now. And his body begins to shape itself to the chair that he sits on. His body and eyes and ears, breathing and all, respond to the context of us and his here and now of us. And it's less and less filled with postures and thoughts of what I should be or what might be happening to me. So one of the most important books on Gestalt, and it's out of print now, it was written by Claudio Naranjo. I think it's called Gestalt Techniques or something like that. In that book, he says that the criteria of diagnostics that we're using in Gestalt is however the client avoids the here and now, then whatever avoidance they're using for being in the here and now is something of a filter. It's one of their conflict points. And that if they're in the here and now, responding to the situation here and now, which also means that parts of the past are here, parts of the future are there, but that they're not dominating everything. You will begin to recognize that as seeing that their eyes and ears are functioning, listening, hearing for what's here. And they're not so much in their head, and their speech is not so much I should be this, I should be that, but it's just is speech. It's here and now. That is so, so and so and so and so. Yeah, so I've said a lot of words. Do you have questions or something that you noticed that you want me to speak about?
The summation of what you just did before, you're trying to get him out of the should systems.
Can you speak up? I don't know if it's going to pick it up.
In summations, you're taking him from the should systems and what he's feeling to the here and now to get in touch with his body, to come out with the people into enlightenment, basically. And that was basically what you did.
Yeah.
Within that whole session.
To come away from the dream of the shoulds, and to begin to experience what actually was possible here. And the bridge, or the real important bridge here for him was, for me, was that it's okay to be tentative. That it's okay not to know. And it's okay to kind of be exploring. And that got him out of being totally subjective in what we call narcissistic. Everything is me, me, me. It's me and you, me and you. And that was the bridge.
I have a question. My tendency would have been at an early point when Lee was just beginning to cry a little bit and feel sad, to just want to hold him and let him cry and probably cry with him. And I wonder how you maintain your stance or that distance. I tend to just want to nurture that tentativeness or something.
Whatever one did to get it to a we situation would have been the right thing. To come away from him being isolated to him feeling part of something. And if you held him, it's wonderful. I was trying to convey that by just my feelings, which were also that kind of, that Lee, I really am here and receptive to you. And there is no perfect way that each client or was it reflector, initiator situation is going to be handled differently according to your creativity, according to your own insights. But I think that that the theory that I'm trying to give you and what you can study for more benefit in when you're working is that we're trying to pay attention to what's not flexible here, what's missing, and then to whatever we can think of that provides that, that allows that to happen. Like, what can it be like? I mean, anyone who's teaching it, I mean, you really have to do your own style, or it's not going to be authentic. And you really have to do what comes up out of your own creativity. It's my way of working that I particularly do it this way. And for many years I did lots of touching, and now I'm not so much touching. It's just the way I'm working now.
Can you say that you had a goal then with this session?
The goal of this session?
That you had a goal, that you had a direction that you wanted to proceed in?
When I began, what I wanted to do was to show how we go about following the line of the emerging Gestalten. That as the person is sitting there, they're having a perception. And that perception will come to the foreground and either form with other emergent qualities or it will disappear. And as we explore what's going on in the here and now, it will be that, oh, there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this. There will be different kinds of perceptual things happening. You will hear things, you will see things, you will feel things, and you will think things. And what I was trying to do was, as he began to find out what it is that is the present concerns of him, what are the present foreground awarenesses, and those foreground awarenesses imply also background phenomena. Like if he thinks of himself as a foreigner, which is a foreground event to his thoughts and his feelings, that means, in the background, that means belongingness is an issue. And so I took that as the main theme here, the main figure ground here. Foreignness, belongingness. And I tried to, as many ways as possible, shift into belongingness as phenomenon. But what is potential here between he and I as belonging? What is potential here between the group and him as belonging? Can I belong as a tentative, playful, creative child? Can I belong with my feet touching here? And his interpretation was starting to be negative. And I said, no, that's not negative, that's creative. And suddenly he belonged. It wasn't, he didn't have to defend himself. And so on and so on. I was blocking, a lot of the tasks of this role is blocking the fleeing away from the here and now, fleeing away from belongingness as an issue. That he avoids that issue by putting himself in the category of I'm out, rather than, well, what can you do to start to belong? So that whole category of behavior I began to push for. That what can you do, Lee, to feel like you belong? What can you initiate to feel like you belong? Yeah?
I saw two things that you did that other people, most of the facilitators I've seen, I thought would do differently, or that I've experienced them as doing differently. When very early in the session, his feelings came up, and he was tearing and trembling, and I would have expected you to follow that feeling, and instead you went another direction with it and brought it into the relationship with you. And I wonder if you gathered the information from just the present when he, stated what was going on with him to make you bring it back in relationship with you, or were you using other information that you knew of him already from before?
No, this is coming back to an important point, that as the person is exploring their here and now, there are foregrounds that appear that they need to embed themselves in so they can finish the situation. Like I described the situation of getting hungry, and after a while hunger dominates, and to make that foreground go away, you need to get food. Now, very early on in this, what you talked about, what happened was he got into a conflict. His conflict was between melting and crying and anger and holding on. So I asked him to increase that conflict, because when you increase what is foreground, it tends to saturate itself and go away. So, like, he began to flood himself with that phenomenon, began to really sense that phenomenon, and then I brought it into, okay, now make that conflict real with me, and to finish that situation. And that's what we essentially dealt with, was that conflict, as you explore the here and now, you will come into the point of, here is something unfinished. And you stay with that, what's unfinished, until it's finished. It might be they're not taking a full breath. And I think I did that with him. I noticed he was pressing, pressing, pressing. And he wasn't letting a breath, so I asked him to let a breath. Okay, he takes a breath, and then we come back to the conflict. And the point is that the organism mobilizes itself to finish everything that's unfinished. And if you can hold the person in the foreground of what's unfinished and keep probing at it, they will mobilize more and more of their capacities to finishing that situation. And essentially, the Gestaltist is only dealing with what emerges as unfinished and staying with that, staying with that, staying with that until their thoughts, their fantasies, their body, their hearing, their seeing, their tasting, all of those, all of the apparatus of orientation is focused here on this unfinished situation. And that we trust that it's natural and organic, that it will come to a completion then. It may not come to a completion right here and now. It may take a day. It may take the night's dream. It may take the form of, well, this is an irritant that stimulates something that lasts 6 months before it comes to a completion. But our job as a Gestaltist is, whatever it comes to the foreground as unfinished, don't let them avoid it. Stay with it. Focus on it. Try to get all of their abilities to recognize what's there in action, tuned in. That means eyes, ears, nose, and throat, and their feelings, their gestures. So that's what we're reflecting, is your gestures have something to do with this. Your breathing has something to do with this. What you're looking at has something to do with it. The words that you're hearing. And all of that, if you just keep focusing on it, they will then saturate themselves with it and know what it is that they have to do. And this means to block the should system a lot so that they can saturate themselves with their senses. The should system is saying, don't feel, don't see, don't think, don't hear. That seems like a good place to end. Shall we end now, Marty?
I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Okay, for me as the initiator, and now we're to a point where I'm getting some juice from this. Okay, now you might not do a community open seat for 2 months, and so I want to have a continuity. I'm not able to come to you for 20 private sessions or something. So I go say tomorrow, and Ann Simpkins over here doing the open seat. Now if I wanted to just throw out to her, okay, I want to deal with being tentative. I mean, how does it work? Like, she's going to, I'm going to throw that out. Of course, she's a different therapist, so she's going to go maybe in a different direction or something. How much of my experience is my experience, and how much of it is, the direction that you take me in, or she would take me in, or Chris was doing the thing, would she take me to a different place, and I get, and how do I kind of integrate, or
yeah. Well, to answer your question, if they're really a well-trained Gestaltist, they will interact with your current unfinished business in a way that's creative between the two of you, but it will be dealing with your current situation. They won't be, what I'm saying is that they won't be putting you off on a different track. They will be paying attention to what is critical for you. And I think Anne would do that. She's quite...
I think, as you know, one of my issues is I've been moaning because Dick is gone and I can't finish my work. And I really thought, I haven't done any open seats since he died, and I just really thought that, you could pick up, and Chris could, no one else would know, and when I go in there and say, this is my issue. But if you're trained, then maybe it all, at some point, gets to the answer. So I could find out who I am, or what my problem is like this.
Sure, because the person who really knows how to follow the Gestalten is following the Gestalten. They're not imposing. They're picking up clues from you and weaving those clues. And I am going to do an open seat on Monday and Wednesday of next week.
And so when you come, it's okay to come with an agenda and say, I want to follow my notes from where I left off.
Sure. The only thing is, if it's old business and it shows up in the session, then we'd be in something new. If it's a continuing theme, then we would continue to work.
Continuity.
10 to 12.
10 to what?
10 to 12, the open seat.
Oh, okay.
On Monday?
On Monday and Wednesday.
10 to 1 right now. So.
And tomorrow?
Tomorrow we
everybody's
meet
welcome to
from 3:30 to 6:30.
Yeah.
Where?
I think here, right?
Here.
Yeah.
And Michael, tomorrow's another $5?
Yes. Yes. And for those who have come in, please realize that we're paying for this out of our pockets so we can have Seymour time. And
Thank you,
appreciate
Seymour.
everybody participating.
Thank you for recording this morning. It inspired me to really be professional.
That's it.
Well, I'd like to pick up some of the themes that we talked about yesterday and bring more clarity to them. It seems that you're facing the same situation I did when I first came to Esalen and began working with Fritz. There were a lot of people doing Gestalt, Fritz himself, and no one was really clarifying what the theoretical basis was or is of Gestalt work. So what I'm trying to do is to put in these two lectures, or these two lecture demonstrations, some of the very basic concepts that have to do with the work of Gestalt. And that if you begin to use the tools of the theories, it'll be a lot easier for you and make more sense in what you do when you're practicing with each other. So I thought I'd give you some hair experiments today, and thought I'd talk about this notion of pregnance and the emerging Gestalt concept that, as I said yesterday, that what I'm doing is trying to provide the setting where something that's unfinished can happen, something that's ready to happen can go ahead and finish itself. And the way we do that is to bring things into relationship that often are held apart. Like a feeling might not be connected to your thoughts about that feeling, or the opposite. Your thoughts may be disconnected and disassociated from your feelings. Now, Gestalt as a theory, as a psychological theory, came into being as a reaction to behaviorism, in that counting all of the behavior of counting all of the elements of something, or trying to reduce everything to a stimulus response situation would not really cover the situation of animal behavior, or even the function of a watershed or an ecological unit, that the separating the elements from the context of those elements wouldn't really do justice to what was happening. So the Gestaltists began to examine things in relationship to their surroundings, or their relationships to what was going on in a person's mind. That their mental attitude had a lot to do with what happened too. And things couldn't be reduced to just a strictly stimulus response situation. And essentially it comes out of theories that are biological theories, the grand theories of relationship, or what we know today as ecological notions, that you have to pay attention to the context of a situation, or you're going to lose something very important in its relationship. You can't cut all the trees off a mountain and expect that mountain to recover. You destroy and degrade the whole watershed. Or if you deal with a person's... Another example would be the Jungian notion of, or the Freudian notion of dealing with dream elements as symbols that are constant, that there is something that will continue through time as a meaning. For instance, a snake always means a penis. In Gestalt terms, we don't think of a snake always meaning a penis. It depends on the context and the situation in the dream. In fact, we might say that everything has many meanings, that there are always more things going on than we can assume. And one of the points of working is that we can't really, that when I'm working with someone, I can't really say what's happening. I can't really know what's happening for the person. And I really don't want to. What I want to do is to set in motion an activity, inner mobilization, so that the person can interpret and find meaning in the interview by themselves, and hopefully outside of the session. Hopefully they will take what I've done here or in the session and use it as like just a kind of a, they've got the smell in their nose, but they haven't eaten the steak yet. The snake. That's Freudian. So one of the notions is that in the development of Gestalt, and there's a point when it comes to a stage of almost being recognized or being recognized, and they call that pregnance. That when these elements start to form up, when as I used the example yesterday of an appetite beginning to be recognized, you begin to feel that this little dot means I'm hungry, and this little dot means I'm paying attention to the lecture. And after a point, this little dot the hunger dots begin to build up, and pretty soon there'll be a relationship between these little dots, and they'll form a figure. They'll form something that stands out against the background, and the elements in your consciousness that have to do with listening to the lecture go into the background, and the appetite of hunger becomes something you can't avoid. It dominates your awareness, and it means that you can't think or feel or pay attention to anything else but that hunger. And that means it's reached the state of pregnance. Now, an example in terms of working with people, I might be working with a couple, and this couple have avoided fighting over some issue for a long time. And in the process of working with them, there are real issues that need to be dealt with amongst them, between the two people. And my work with them would be to provoke them to have this argument or fight, but maybe not necessarily in the session, but to set things up so that they can't avoid going home and thrashing out their differences. That might mean taking them just to the point of pregnance in the session, that I'm putting things in such a way that you can't fail to finish it. The tensions within the situation will drive those people to having an argument. Or I may work with someone individually, and it's something that they want to do. It's something they haven't done. A letter they haven't written, or a person they haven't cleared with. I may work with them to a point where, rather than having them finish that issue in the session, I'll work with them to a point where I know there's so much tension there, and they'll feel so unfinished that they'll go home or go out into their everyday existence and take care of that. There's no way they can do that. No way they can really say, oh, I can avoid it. I can continue to avoid it. Yeah, Michael?
So that goes mostly for situations that can be dealt with in, in everyday life. Like, if you want to have a conversation with your father who died, you're not going to do something like that.
No.
And you will work that through in the session.
Right.
That seems like for things that.
But even then, if I'm working with someone whose father who's died, for instance, and having a dialogue with them, with their father in the empty chair, the reason that they're having that dialogue is that there's something unfinished in their lives. And by having that dialogue, it integrates something for them so that they can go to the next point in their life, the next stage in their life. Either that they want to do something about their feelings, their remorse, or they want to make a memorial to their father, they want to do something that their father wished them to do, or something like that is there. That essentially what we're saying is that if there's consciousness of anything with the person, if they have consciousness of something, even if it's a father that's dead, that has something to do with their present existence or their emerging existence. And it will have something, it will have vitality and meaning to them. Another way to talk about this is that this development of a gestalten is also the development of excitement in a person, that we're trying to pay attention to what excites them, what gives interest and mobilizes their eyes and ears and their muscles. So a lot of the time we're paying attention to their gestures, their movements, because the motor system prepares itself for what's unfinished. It gets excited about what's unfinished. And often we may find that what's unfinished is being dealt with by two kinds of activities, that the muscles are preparing to do something, And there are also another set of muscles that are inhibiting that muscle, those activities of completion. And we have the state of conflict, the state of ambivalence then. And we try to then amplify that also, to play that out as a gestalt. That one side talks to the other side. I want to work on the open seat. I don't want to work on the open seat. Take that as a beginning situation. I think of many times that I've worked with you, Cindy, where we go through a period of ambivalence and conflict for a good while before something emerges, and that part of the task of the work is to give time to both sides of the inner dialogue, the I want to and I don't want to, so that there's a chance to play that out, to fill that out in a sense that now I'm the one that's doing it. In simple terms, what we're trying to do is to give the person the control over themselves, and the therapeutic role is not to say, oh, I see that you're angry, go beat a cushion. Rather that, I see you're angry and you seem conflicted. Could you play both sides of that? Could you feel the restraint involved with being angry? And that the person then becomes mobilized to either inhibit the anger completely or to express it. That we're trying to go from a state of ambivalence to a state of some clarity, so that the person can finish their situation or choose not to finish it. But that the therapist's role is not to, the guide's role is not to push and probe and make something happen, rather to, the way I understand Gestalt, the way I like to do Gestalt, and the way I think it is meant to be done, is that we provide as much information as possible for the person working. We bring as many things into relationship as possible, and then let them decide what they want to do with it. That doesn't mean that at times I won't say, stop this, do that. But I will do that at times, but when I'm doing that, I'm trying to give time for something to be on stage that wouldn't be on stage. Like Lee's work yesterday, I was trying to often give time. I was trying to block his thought processes that were, in a sense, calling everything into question. I asked him to stop doing that several times, so that something could exist that would be a deeper sense of himself. That I was thinking that he was avoiding allowing himself to come to pregnance, to come to a complete point with something. He was shifting around too often. And that's what happens a lot in working, is that the deflections that a person is doing, they won't really dwell in anything long enough for it to form into a clear figure. They're disrupting the emergence of a clear gestalt, or a clear foreground. So a lot of the work of a gestaltist can be either, you can either be refereeing and blowing a whistle and say, hey, you're offside here, stop that, let's see what happens if you pay attention to your feelings. Or you can, and that will help something emerge as a foreground, or you can encourage the foreground. You can say, well, I see that your breathing looks shallow. Can you let your breathing become deeper? And after they do that, then we notice that their legs begin to tremble. Can you let your legs tremble? That's also a way to encourage a gestalten to form. Now I tend, as I'm trained a lot in body consciousness and working with different kinds of forms of body work, I tend to pay a lot of attention to body gestures and the function of breathing and color changes in a person's skin, small gestures that don't seem complete, and ask them to pay attention to that. That doesn't mean I don't pay attention to language, and language is also a very important issue here. I've got probably 10 weeks of things that I could teach you, and it's kind of hard for me to pick what to say, so I'll try to stick with just this today of paying attention to the emerging gestalt, and maybe some other time we can go into language and other issues that take care of. What I'd like to do now is have a volunteer for someone, just to work a little bit to clarify what I'm doing, and then to turn to you and give you an experiment to play with as partners. We need to stay near the mic. Can I get you to take that away? Yeah. Okay, what I want to do is to explore just what emerges with you. And I don't know if we work a long time like with Lee yesterday. We got into a real piece of work, but my intent was just to work a short time and then clarify it. And I'd like to do that with you, just work a little while and at times break in and comment and use the situation to elaborate some of these notions I'm talking about. Is that okay?
Teaching session.
Teaching session. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is just use this phrase, now I'm aware of, and go on with that, and she will begin to pick out things by saying that, now I'm aware of. She'll begin to pick out what's her foreground, and what she's paying attention to, what she's not paying attention to.
So now I'm aware of the shape that I'm sitting in, and I'm aware of my heartbeat and my voice sounding kind of in my throat, and I'm aware of a slight tremor. And I'm aware of feeling restless, like I could, bounce out of the chair in this kind of posture. And I was aware of that when I was sitting on the pillow too, of my attention just flitting. And I'm aware of paying attention to you and not paying attention to everybody else. The nail clipper.
Are you aware that you dropped saying now? So try it. Pick it up again now.
Now I'm aware of the ocean sound. A lot of little sounds outside. And now I'm aware I'd like to stop doing this.
Doing what?
Now I'm aware. Yeah, now I'm aware of a lot of sound outside.
Do you feel an inner response to that?
Now what I'm aware of is like shifting back and forth between sounds outside, people outside, and my body.
Good.
And wanting to shut my eyes.
What does that do when you shut your eyes?
Now when I shut my eyes, I feel I can settle into myself. So I feel physical, more dropped. When I shut my eyes, I'm much more aware of my body and my breathing and where I'm tense.
It sounds like it implies if you see something that you're disturbed by that, disturbed from being in contact with yourself.
I'm definitely more intensely in contact with myself when I shut my eyes.
Okay. So the first thing I want to do now is, could you describe what disturbs you when you have your eyes open? What interferes with you being in touch with yourself?
Just that there's something else in my awareness. I'm looking at you. And I'm paying more attention to your face and your movements and everything. And when I shut my eyes again, it's like I know you're there. And I still will just go much more deeply into myself.
Okay. Continue to stay outside and let's see what happens. Now, let me make a comment here. That when I ask her to do this, you see more agitation, she gets more excited. There's something here to be dealt with. I don't know if it's, I'm wanting to increase the level of anxiety and excitement by doing this, to see just what that is. And it's a way of drawing out more of a sense of figure ground here. That it's very easy for her to shut her eyes and go inside. She's more in balance, I guess is the term it would be. And I'd like to find out, well, what happens if you stay more agitated?
Yeah, I really want to do that. Or look away. So, I've just become very aware of the situation.
Okay. And how do you feel that? Where do you feel that?
I feel more on the front of my body. I feel more sort of contracted. And I feel more on the spot.
On the spot.
More looked at.
Do you like that or not?
No.
You don't like it? Could you use that statement to some of us? Say, I don't like being on the spot. I don't like to be looked at.
I don't know why I got up here today. I don't like being looked at. I don't like being on the spot here. I don't like feeling what I feel is that I'm aware of you guys and that I would sort of push my process along faster than it would if I was just alone with you, Seymour. I don't like being observed. I don't like being looked at.
Can you say how you defend yourself from that? How you protect yourself from being observed? That might be one way.
Yeah. Shut my eyes. Not look out myself, so I just cut off some awareness that everyone is out there looking at me except for Cindy, whose eyes are shut. I'd sort of space myself out. I'll let my attention wander, or I'll feel like a disconnect, and that I have less juice. So I feel like I'm sort of erasing myself.
When you're what?
When I'm looked at, I'll make myself less visible, or less interesting to look at. So you look at something else.
Okay, I would guess that you're dealing with a conflict of being on stage or not, whether you want to be on stage or not.
Maybe.
Maybe. So it looks like one leg is in the room and one leg is pulled back.
Yeah, just goes half. Goes back.
Does that, can you describe what you feel in your left side, the part that you would call pulled back?
I feel more like this side is connected with you, and it's facing toward you, and this side is sort of out in the room a little bit. Let's see. I feel more contracted on this side, and more. It feels more. There's more energy in this side. So, and my right side feels kind of empty.
Okay. I think we have a good circumstance here to have an inner dialogue. It sounds like one part of you is saying, yes, I want to be here. Another part is ambivalent about it.
Or clear, no, I don't want to be
clear, I don't want to be here. And what I'd like to do is have a chair talk right now to elaborate this exploration. So let's see this. Put that on camera.
This is the first time since I came to Esalen that I've actually talked to a chair.
Yeah.
Instead of a so where am I? Which half is which?
You decide.
This will be the hidden half.
Okay.
So I'm the hidden half.
And this is the
more visible.
Okay, as the hidden half, then tell this part that is more visible. How do you feel about being made more visible as the hidden half?
Well, I want to be seen and I don't want to be seen.
Okay, now switch seats and sit over. Sit over here. Now she just said, I want to be seen and I don't want to be seen. And if you were like a big sister to her, what would you be doing with her? Or if you're this other side that brings her on stage.
So, well, it's okay to hide out some of the time, and it's good to come out sometimes too. I feel like she hides so much she can't see herself.
Tell her that.
You hide out so much that you lose your map of yourself.
And I want.
And I want some more clarity. I want some more visibility. You know, I want to clear things up.
How do you feel sitting here? Just be this side for a minute. How do you feel?
I feel self-conscious too. I feel like this is not an open seat, you know. I feel really on stage, which I usually don't. I feel you've got a point, because there are some things that I don't want everybody here to see, and I sometimes screw up and let things pop out that I don't want to be seen.
You go over there and tell her about that. There are some things I want to keep to myself.
Yeah, but you have a big mouth. I mean, you're just outrageous. There are a lot of things that I want to keep hidden, or I only want to share with certain people at certain times, and you really get carried away, and I feel embarrassed later, and I feel manipulated. And I feel shy.
Let's try this phrase. Can you say to me, I'm only going to reveal what I want to reveal?
I'm only going to reveal what I want to reveal.
Well, I meant to say it to me.
To you.
Yeah.
I'm only going to reveal what I want to reveal.
Try that to the group too.
I'm only going to reveal what I want to reveal. I'm only going to show what I've decided is okay to show.
Now just take a moment to feel how you are right
I don't feel strong with that.
now.
And the reason is that I don't know what's going to come out until it's come out.
Uh-huh.
So it's like I don't feel like I can say I'm only going to show what I want to, because I don't feel like I have that foreknowledge.
Uh-huh.
So it's not that deliberate.
Uh-huh.
I'm not that deliberate
Uh-huh.
with when I come out.
Uh-huh. That must give you trouble then in circumstances like this.
Yeah, actually all the time.
Uh-huh. Actually all the time. Now think of something you don't want to be revealed.
I know this game, Seymour.
Okay. Got it?
Yeah.
Okay, now tell it to me.
I'm not going to tell it to you.
No?
No.
Oh. I'll give you a dime. No?
No.
You have the tape?
I don't want to.
What could I do to get it out of you?
If we were alone, I would tell you.
Oh, if we were alone.
But
Not here. Well, if we were here, under what circumstances would you tell it to us?
If I was deep enough in process, it would come out.
Uh-huh.
But I'm maintaining a lot of control.
Uh-huh.
There's like a certain level of feeling where it would come out because it's pretty major for me.
Uh-huh. Do you feel any nervousness right now?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you feel that?
In the front of my head,
Uh-huh.
the back of my neck, around my eyes, the whole front of my body, basically.
Uh-huh.
It's almost like making a barrier. Because I feel a stiffness that I make.
Mm-hmm. That's this.
good.
Saying good.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, now what I'd like you to do is to sit over here and be someone who could possibly get that secret out of you. What would they be like? What would they be saying to you?
In this context?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is a group of really caring people, and they're all real supportive, and no one's gonna think worse of you if you talk about that. And there are a lot of people who have had that experience. It's not a lot of people who've had that experience. It's not something unique and horrible.
Okay, now switch seats and do the other side.
I don't care. I don't care. I'm going to suffer with this on my own. I don't feel like talking about it. And I hear, and you can't make me.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't make me.
Okay, now here's a place that I'd like to come to an end. And I'd like to have comments from you. What did you see happening here? What did you notice? Yeah, Steve.
Well, I saw you pushing her to that place, so there's, it seems like there's no way now that she can't deal with that issue.
Uh-huh.
It's, you brought it right up to the top. I saw you moving her in the more difficult ways.
Uh-huh.
If there was a choice of what's comfortable and what's uncomfortable, moving toward the excitement of uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah, what I would say is what I dealt with was the issue of ambivalence, of being here on stage, that I continued to work with that situation, making it more and more a figure ground, that this symbol, it's an awkward one, but this form of something being figural. I want to be on stage and be a good girl and be a good Esalen member of a class and deal with my issues and so on, is one part of herself, and she's in conflict with another part of herself who says, hey, you say too much too soon, you don't have discretion, or whatever her own words for that are. And I kept working with that. I kept making that more and more elaborated, the issue between those two parts, like how does this side feel about this side, how does this side feel about that side, what are the physical and emotional components of being this side, what are the physical and emotional components of being this side, and what are the sentences that go with this side, what are the sentences that go with that side, and to make it more and more pregnant as an issue. That I'm not, and here's a point that I think you need to learn about as you see many different kinds of therapy here, and sometimes I keep saying the word therapy, I should watch my mouth now. You see more and more kinds of therapy that are not called therapy here. And that, or many kinds of work here, where they'll take this side, the reticent side, and say, come on, push, get out here with that, be that part, actualize this part, play the motions of this part, and forget this part. You know, just disregard it. That's really not Gestalt work. Gestalt work is allowing the person to mobilize their defenses, have their ambivalent sides. The both sides are the full personality. And we think of the personality being pushed to be just this is a forcing. And it isn't an integrating, developmental kind of thing for the person. That when we're working with them, we want them to have control of the throttle as well as the brakes. That by going back and forth like this, we help her elaborate her choices. That's my consideration here when I'm working. That it's up to her to decide whether she wants to do this. I will probe and maybe ask embarrassing questions or put her in a double bind so that this becomes clearer what are her mechanisms of choice. Now, my guess is that we've raised the threshold of excitement and anxiety around these two issues so they become more important to her outside of this session. That even more now, that's an issue that will go on working with her. She'll probably have dreams about it for tonight and tomorrow. Some dreams will come up that have to do with this. And I'm looking at this as a kind of increasing her differentiation. That she's now a more elaborate personality around these issues, and that at some point she can come to the end of these issues. She will be clearer about what she wants to choose, when she wants to reveal herself, when she doesn't want to reveal herself. That, as I know her and have worked with her a long time, both Rolfing and in Gestalt sessions, there's a part of her that's very sweet and shy and tender and isn't for the world at large, is for just one-to-one relationships. And there's a part of her that is big and strong and wants to be out there and is pushing this other part, the shy part, off and around. And so what we're trying to do here is to find an integration here, being strong as well as vulnerable. How can those two coexist? And that would be, in my mind, my goal in integrating these parts. That there's the criteria of Gestalt work is integration. And the more I work, the more I really do believe that I'm watching a process that's innate within us. That if we do polarize X with non-X and make that polarization really strong, then there's an innate ability and capacity within us to make that an integrated part of themselves. They'll come to balance. And it's that I'm trusting in my work. That I polarize, I find something that's happening, and I try to find out what is its polar opposite, like shyness, exhibitionism, or private, public, might be here the polarity. And I try to exaggerate that polarity for a time and let them interact so that the ecology of that inner world begins to find all the relationships that go with being private and public, and to let those parts find a new balance after the session. So are there questions or comments? Or yeah, Michael?
I have a question. When you let her play her the split first, and then suddenly you said try to be or can you be a big sister, telling her that somehow to me it seemed, you know, there wasn't a split anymore.
Uh-huh.
It was the private or the one part that said, okay, I'm not interesting to look at or whatever, I want to be private.
Uh-huh.
And then the other part suddenly was the big sister that kind of talked from her head.
Uh-huh.
It would also be nice to be more seen and la la la, but not really the side that says, okay, I am interesting, I want to be seen.
Uh-huh.
So,
That just popped into my head to say, be the big sister. I had the sense of the big sister pulling the shy little sister out, and that was my own self in there. That was my own idea in there.
I mean, I can see the big sister, I mean, I can see you were kind of coming from a place that sounded like a big sister, you know, very rational, very, you know, not a lot of emotion in there, of being, okay, I want to be seen, I want to be interesting, but more like it should be, la la la.
What I mainly feel in myself today is the hidden side. And it is hard for me to really get into the other one today.
And she showed that when she came up. Her first way of coming up was all closed off, the cloak on her, and when I asked her to take it away, she removed it with a lot of inhibition and shyness in there. So it's clear that she's, in some sense, pushing herself to be up here. And good, great, it gives us something to work with. But what is that with her when she's pushing herself beyond her own basis of support? And it makes for a good session. It certainly made for something interesting to work with. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, I didn't think it was very interesting.
Uh-huh.
As far as from watching outside, it's interesting to me.
Uh-huh.
And seems very delicate. No fireworks today.
Yeah, that's something I'd like to say here, is that please don't think Gestalt is fireworks or catharsis all the time. A lot of it is just this kind of weaving at how the person manifests right now, very obvious, very ordinary. It's only in times of crises or when things are really cooking that the catharsis generally comes on stage. And we see that a lot here because people only work when they're in a cathartic mode or ready to really deal with something. We see that a lot and we tend to think that's what Gestalt is. But it's not really. Gestalt is this kind of just weaving and knitting your sweater, and it's, you know, loop one, drop one, loop one, drop one. It's kind of a process of paying attention to the little tiny events. Now, another meaning of Gestalt is that the Gestalt pattern is more than the sum of its parts. And in some sense, my work is to keep elaborating all the little parts and bringing them into relationship, but there's something there that they will give meaning to from that is more than the sum of those parts. That no matter how many words we put on this, no matter how many actions that we partake of in the session, or little psychodramas or experiments, what is happening here is more than the sum of all those activities. And that what she and I gain from this is something that, you know, still has yet to be discovered. It's still more than you are at this moment. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Seymour.
Okay. So, let's hear a few more comments. Sam.
Two observations that I made. I realized that you were setting up a safe environment for her to deal with whatever was going on, and the restriction was in her body very evidently. And then suddenly you had her say, "I'm aware that I'm disturbed."
Uh-huh.
And at that very moment, the legs went out, crossed over, the left arm went back over the chair, and there was just a beautiful opening that happened.
Right, she reversed figure then.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
And that was really nice for me to see, and the way you paced her so perfectly in that moment. And the other thing is that I'm glad you mentioned the fact that Gestalt doesn't have to be this flashy, spectacular event. It's been my judgment and observation that sometimes a practitioner will attempt that out of an ego-based place. You know, if the show's not really good, you're not going to have a good show.
Right.
And it's up to the facilitator or the practitioner to do that. So I'm glad that you just pointed that out. Gestalt can be an easy, soft, quiet, and period without all the show parts.
Right. Did any of you others notice that when she reversed her body, she went from like this to then it was something like that?
Like it was legs crossed, left arm over back of
It's
chair.
still the same side.
It was a complete reversal in terms of right-left symmetry. And some of the things that I'm watching for when I'm working is that. Do they, like if her right side she described as her intimate, or her left side as her intimate side, and is more in room with this foot. But this foot and arm are drawn back and she's okay one-to-one with me. Then there was a moment when she went like that. She kind of what I would call reverse figures. And that's a tool of the Gestaltist to use that often and also to watch for that. That's a criterion that we're getting somewhere, more or less, that there really is starting to be that what was figure can become ground and what was ground can become figure, or that figure reversal. Another way to talk about that is, have you all seen, you must have all seen the figure ground figure of the goblet and the faces. And that if you can reverse that, that's a criteria of that your perceptual modes are functioning okay. Now, that's also what we're doing up here a lot, is like trying to provoke that spontaneous figure ground reversal 2 or 3 times in a, I'd say, 20-minute or half-hour session. That if there's a figure ground reversal a couple of times, then we say, oh yeah, we're really providing this figure ground shifting, we're helping that happen, and that helps her recognize those dimensions a little more clearly. I don't know if I'm saying that in words clear enough for you to understand, but it's a real important point in terms of my work. It's one of my basic functioning theoretical tools as I'm working. I'm always trying to pay attention to what can be figure ground reversals here and to encourage them. I might even ask someone to change, if they're cramped up and not moving on this side, I might even ask them to, well, try moving this side. What does that feel like to move that side, to reverse it, to actually reverse it? It's better when it happens spontaneously, but I'm not averse to asking a person to play the other figure or the other potential figure even when I see it.
What I felt when I was working was there's definitely a level of sadness that I could go into today. And I felt that I didn't feel like I was in my head, even though I was maintaining a lot of control over how far I was going to go. I felt pretty integrated between my head and my feelings.
Sure,
yeah,
I felt that.
Which is nice.
Seymour, how would you relate the idea of an impasse? I mean, the idea of leaving the Gestalt session at Pregnance where something's going to come. And that impasse then to figure ground. Is figure ground then very balanced and neither one comes?
Yeah. But what we would do then, in this, we do the same thing as this in an impasse situation where a person is stuck. is to have them go deeper and deeper into that stuck place and to feel out both sides of that tension. That if I'm squeezing my chest so I won't feel a feeling and I'm holding on to my breathing and won't let something, okay, increase that. Now the theory here is that if you embed yourself in a figure ground relationship and keep going into it long enough, it will saturate itself and has to change. Now sometimes an impasse may last a long time. It may last 6 months. And it may last through the time of a session. I mean, one of the things that Esalen has built its fame on is going into that figure ground deeply enough and thoroughly enough so that it does shift within the week that they're here or the one session that they are in. And it means, in some sense, identifying with all the components so deeply that it's really you. It's not a disassociated you. And the terms here, we could say that the personality can associate to phenomenon or can disassociate from internal phenomenon or their surroundings. And the task of the Gestaltist is to get you to associate, and we call that take responsibility for whatever's happening, and to say that that's me, that's me that's stuck, that's me that's smoking, that's me that's sleeping too long, that's me that's whatever it is, so that you say that that's you long enough that you can then make an active choice about it. And it doesn't mean that they necessarily will quit smoking then, but that they will be actively smoking, and that it's clear it's their responsibility. It's not something coming from outside. And that so an impasse, this goes under the criteria that the disassociated parts of yourself are the problem here in Gestalt work. Can we take those parts that are disassociated, get the person to associate with them, thereby making themselves the parts that are there and really part of themselves become more part of you and more than your more so-called a whole person in that sense. Yeah, Mike?
I have one question more about this pregnance thing. I mean, I don't know, somehow I don't believe that that it really, you know, it's true that the person will go after the session and this will change or something. I mean, I feel like, I mean, it might actually strengthen their resistance so much that they will think, okay, well, this went well, you know, I got away with it, sort of, and will kind of be reinforced with, you know what I mean?
Sure, I think that can happen.
So how do you feel the point of, this pregnance, whether that's the real point or,
well,
how do you do that?
I mean, anything I'm doing here is kind of a artistic guess. I can't really say scientifically that when I add 2 and 2 together it will make 4 in terms of this. I can only have a sense of how I've worked and what I'm doing.
It's more like an intuitive, okay, this is...
It's an intuitive thing. I can't even really describe to you a situation of when I worked with someone and that's happened right now. But I can say where it came from is that I felt that in the early years at Esalen we thought we were doing Gestalt, but what we were doing was primal scream work. And we were doing that exact thing of going so deeply into the repressed or the held back and pushing for this to happen and making a person cathart and so on. And I felt like after a couple of years of that, all they did was learn how to scream in a room with a therapist, And they really didn't learn how to go home and defend their territory. And that I felt like, hey, that's not really helpful work with a person. And I changed my mode of working then.
And Michael, another way you could word that is in terms of avoidance, what you're worried about is that in doing that and raising that level of pregnancy, you're coming to clarity of figure rather than resolution. And as long as the figures are very clear, then it's precluding some of the complete avoidance in that way. And then by clarity of figure, maybe the resolution will happen. That would be an alternative way to word that.
Yeah. See, we're talking about ideals. When I'm talking about this, I'm talking about it in terms of ideal theory and ideal practice. But certainly, when is that happening in the situation, I really don't know. Although I've had plenty of experience of feeling like that works. I think I worked with you, Michael, once and kind of pushed you and probed with you about the question of connecting with your family. And, you know, like, the question was, he was feeling isolated. I felt like what he needed to do was contact his family. And that happened. He called his sister, and then that completed that circumstance. Now, he could have refused to call his sister and say, no, I don't want to, I won't do it. I would say, well, then my goal and the biological need there was not met because he wasn't ready at that point. But in that circumstance it happened, and it did take him another step. What do you think, Bill? I think of you, Ellen. Okay, shall we do a partner experiment now? Okay. Let's face off with a partner now.
Sure.
Sit, take two cushions and sit opposite one another somewhere in the room. Find out what happened. So, most of you have been around Esalen for quite a good deal of time, and I was hoping that this elaboration yesterday and today would help you, just be a little more secure and a little more understanding of what you're looking for when you're working with someone. And I wonder if that happened. And also, if there are any questions, you have any difficulties. Alan, you had something to say.
It wasn't a difficulty, it was more of an observation.
Good.
I have more experience with NLP than I do with Gestalt. And I was, I guess I became aware of the similarity of
there are a lot of similarities.
Yeah, talking to different parts. Just a basic reprogramming of that part, or acceptance of it, saying, would you mind just keeping it a little quieter in here?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and bringing that to my awareness of that similarity, I realized I had a whole lot of reference now available to me in Gestalt that I had separated before.
Sure. I mean, NLP is developed out of parts of Gestalt, parts of Satir's family therapy, and parts of an old method that was where I began to be interested in therapy in the early 60s in San Francisco, a system called General Semantics. And that had a lot of influence on Fritz's work and NLP too. That's the basic notion of general semantics was the map is not the territory, and all of those notions about how we all each form our own reality. That's also in Gestalt. That our subjective world colors what we see and how we name it, how we use it, and that each one has a different aspect. I think it's one of Chrissy's favorite experiments to do with putting something in the middle of the room and have each person describe it, and we find each person has a different description, and that description will include their current interests.
Become the drum.
Becoming the drum, and then describe yourself as the drummer. Yeah, I was very excited by NLP when it showed up because it helped me be a better gestaltist.
Yeah, that was my observation.
So how did it go? Did you find a polarity or something to talk to? That was really my point, for you to begin to get a sense of why the cushion talk and how to go about picking out elements that are elements to talk to. Michael?
Well, the thing I recall from the practicum that usually the first or second sentence is a key to what the session's going to be about. And the first thing that Ellen said was that I'm sitting here and I feel like I'm into avoidance. So I put avoidance on the pillow.
Great.
And Ellen talked to avoidance, and that was our polarity test.
Great.
That was our dialogue.
Great. That's an important point then. That often it's true that in, I forget what it is, communications theory, some of the theories of communication is that the first action and words of a person sitting down are setting the tone. They're saying, this is me and this is the way I want you to handle me, by their actions and their behavior. And I find that it's pretty much borne out. That will be one of the issues that needs to be taken up before you can go further, and it may be the whole issue. So that, and another way to talk about this in psychosynthesis theory is that there are subpersonalities, and we're talking to subpersonalities. Another way to talk about it is the transactional analysis theories of parent, adult, and child, that there are internal entities that we could call parent, child, and adult. I tend to think that there are all kinds of sub-personalities that are there that are somewhat gestalts in themselves. They're a real personality. That part of you that avoids can be a whole personality, and it's pretty well formed. It comes on stage when we want it, or are using it. And there might be a part that's engaging. That's our personality that engages. And that's how I tend to think about it when I'm working with them, is that there actually is a personality in there that's my mother, that's me, that's my mother's values and should system, and then there's a part of me that's me, and that there are like two personalities in there fighting for dominance, or one's yielding the floor to the other one. But generally the problems are when they're fighting for dominance over one another, and in conflict with something that you want to do in your life right now. Cindy, what happened with your...
Actually, it's interesting. We were both very tired, and I was being reflector, and I sort of threw it all out the window. We tried one thing, didn't really fly. But it was interesting because I just sat and Cindy talked with me, and basically what occurred was she was talking at the beginning about taking care of herself and being very tired, not having enough sleep. And just in the course of talking, she hit some issues that released a lot of energy, and she felt much more awake.
Sure.
So I didn't work very well.
I appreciated the value in just having someone attentively listening and not providing any direction at all. That I was able to get to what it was I needed to
Sure. That's what happens if the person is allowed to explore and is willing to bring up new material, they will form a figure of something that is of interest, that's incomplete, and that will lead to a vital kind of engagement with that, and then you can go on. I think there's a book in our bookstore called Focusing by Jenlin. That's a really good book for you to read, because it's essentially the Gestalt method too, of saying something and then finding out how that feels, what you're saying. Try to ground your discussion or talk in what you're feeling, and that will lead you to the next phase, or to some kind of resolution, as you described. It isn't necessary to use all of these tools. I think it helps me when I'm working to, when someone comes in and then they come into a stuck place or a conflict, then I can begin to play the both sides of the conflict and we go on. But when I look at all these other methods like NLP or focusing or transactional analysis, they all seem to have very, very often many common elements and are useful.
Seymour, also with the session with Ellen, at the end of it, rather than just allowing it to be, I made a contract between the avoiding figure and Ellen to be aware of that and to listen to it but not necessarily have to follow that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's Gestalt or not, if that's usually it's supposed to, from what I've been taught, let them arrive at their own conclusion and take it from there. And what I was doing was neatly wrapping it up, so to speak, rather than letting it just lie, or letting it follow their own conclusions.
Well, what I do is to provide a setting where they make up their own choice. Like what you did in having her make a contract was offer more of an exchange, that they have to come into relationship in some way. And that's what I'm talking about when I say that the figure-ground play between figure and ground is that you're trying to get some interaction going. And that the criteria of Gestalt work is have an interaction. Like if you have a dream symbol of a house, then okay, have the house talk to the ground that the house is on. The important thing is to have this dialogue so that there's interaction going on. And that leads to something, just as Cindy just talking leads to something. And if you're balancing it out, like you're a cook, adding ingredients and so on, that let the taste, when it's finished, let them decide that. 90% of the time you're letting them go their own way. 10% of the time you need to put something in there to help them clarify something that they can't see. And generally, we would say that there's a part of us that is conscious of ourselves and part of us is not conscious of ourselves. And the reflector's role is to help the person notice those things that they just generally avoid or are unconscious of. And that gives more information for them to put the pieces together for themselves.
So, the question then is, making that contract, is that wrong for me to present that?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, I believe in you doing anything that you can to elaborate the situation and kind of bring stuff in. It's like they're sitting in a sandbox with no toys. You try to provide toys for them to play with in that sandbox, and when they're doing that, then they have more elements that are being played with, whether it's contracts or your impressions or some insight that you have or whatever. The thing that I tend to do is to not let the situation stay static, but ask them to move around, play a role, do something, so that there's some element of action in the interview, that they're forced to confront something like making a contract. Well, and you have to, the client has to somehow answer that response, either denying it or taking it up.
So it forces the action.
Yeah, it forces something to happen. Well, let's make a round and then end for this morning. Heike, what?
Well, I have to admit that I mainly came in contact with my inadequacy. I really don't remember what we did, and I felt the feeling I had through the whole session was being terribly intimidated and holding on to, some straw I felt like I have. Larry ended this quote-unquote session with being confused, and I felt a need to really make sure that he was okay with that confusion. I felt like his confusion, like a knot in my stomach. I did not want him to, get upset about it. That's all I can say. I really don't. I can't intellectually remember anymore what we did.
Yeah, well, for me it was really good. I mean, the confusion seemed to be kind of what you were talking about, where I noticed in myself where I avoid conflict with other people or parts of myself, and what I ended up doing was really contacting two different parts of myself that really wanted to do different things, real strong desires, and I really got in touch with that, and I could come real close and look, and the confusion was like you said, I could come back and say, well, there's two, but they're both alive, which was an alternative to the passive observer, just getting all, and just like being asleep all the time because I'm just tired of all this conflict. So I felt good to be brought closer into myself, and yeah, so that was my experience, and I feel, because a lot of times I thought of Gestalt as a conflict resolution, and I could never go to OpenSea because I didn't have an issue, I didn't have a conflict that I had going to work out, and the whole thing was that, my pattern is to avoid that, so, I didn't do anything for my first 6 months here, and then finally when I started just going for it, then I became aware, and I became a lot more alive from just becoming aware of the conflicts and all the, interesting and neat stuff happening in myself. So, yeah.
Yeah, often the point of the interview can be that we arrive at conflict, at confusion.
Right. Yeah.
And that's just fine. That's see, the point of Gestalt is to try to accept what is, whether it's what we call quotes negative or not. But just let them be with what happens there. That is something that they're accepting and not, as he describes it, he's not disassociating from it, he's associated with it, he accepts it as part of his ongoing existence, and that's a point of Gestalt. We're trying to say, okay, that's part of life too. So you did well.
Yeah, you did well.
Eric?
I don't want you to feel it.
Well, my sensation was a little confusing in the same way, but what I'm left with is a really definite sensation that I didn't have to start with, that I'll probably hang with for a while. I started out having a lot of trouble having pain at the top of my breath, and somehow came to a figure of like a band that prevented contact, which made pain in the heart area more intense. And it got played around from trying to make a split between heart and mind, which is what I wanted to do as reflector, and then what Michael had me do is be the band itself. And it was enough physically disturbing that I couldn't be other than just the physical sensation, which I still have.
Good. So he brought something into pregnance, this band that wasn't conscious before. Great.
Yeah, I really just like doing this. I mean, it felt real nice to be present for somebody, and I like playing around with, different. I think I got a little sucked into this, really, looking for splits and stuff, because that's what we tried first, kind of, you know, to have a dialogue between the split, and then it didn't seem to work that well, and I thought, well, you know, just forget about the split thing and, you know, try to stay with the foreground, which was there. I mean,
sure. That's, yeah, that's essentially what we're trying for, is to, what is the subject of interest and excitement in the person at this moment, and that could be, you know, the foreground is this band in his chest that dominates his awareness field, and that's what we're looking for. Ellen?
I've realized it too. My avoidance, to even talk about it is a step. To acknowledge it to another person is not avoiding. So Michael's picking that up and working with it immediately. I appreciate it. And from what Larry was talking about confusion, I remembered something that before clarity comes, confusion is usually there. So it's a good state to be left in. And I found myself confused in this work a lot, and that thought helps me. And I was scared to be the reflector. I realized that as we started, I was much more comfortable saying what I was aware of than Michael, and having to look. I don't have any experience in doing that, so that's where I feel weak in this work.
Michael?
Well, initiation, of course, is my major avoidance, so I immediately assume the reflector role, which feels quite comfortable. I thought we did okay. We actually covered two issues. We dealt with avoidance and finished with that, and we went to another issue and dealt with that. And everything to me seemed very clear and quite natural, which kind of surprised me because it's been a while since I've reflected. It surprised me because it's been a while since I've reflected. And for me, my avoidance is being in my body. It's interesting to listen to Eric, because Eric seems so much in his body. And I'm just so locked out of my body and so much in my head. It's interesting listening to a different balance. And I'm aware of that's what I'm avoiding, is getting into my body. So just listening to people make the weather reports brought up issues for me as well.
I had one other thing to say. What we did work, Michael, in the avoidance, that was general. And then he said, is there something you avoid specifically? So he got me to be specific, and then we worked on one thing. And I appreciated that rather than just talking in a generality.
Yeah, in order to really have a foreground, you have to be specific. So that when you find someone in generalities or using words that are generalizations, then ask them to be specific.
Give an example.
Give an example. What is that like in your real life?
I feel very much that pregnant, I guess, state in myself, and not particularly around any of the issues we discussed today, but simply focusing for a long time, even just focusing on being a clear listener. I definitely feel moved to an edge in myself, and I feel good.
I really liked that Annie took care of herself in the session by moving into a place where she could listen to me attentively, and then to say that she was letting go of really being working at reflecting, because I felt very taken care of, even though it wasn't within the structure that was expected. And I learned a lot from this, about how I can take care of myself and still get what I need. And it's not necessarily what I expected from someone different.
Right. Just attentive awareness can be enough.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I'm just aware of how much that is.
Right, it's a lot. Okay, we'll end here. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get your buddy to you tomorrow. Rest of it.